My family labeled me as a Navy dropout. I kept silent at my brother's SEAL ceremony until his general spotted me and said, "Colonel, you're here." The room fell silent, and my father's jaw dropped. Can you truly imagine watching your family celebrate your siblings' triumph? Their hushed murmurs dismissing your own failures, utterly blind to the decorated war hero standing silently among them? That very scenario was my reality. On the day of my brother's Navy SEAL ceremony, a single word shattered my world, irrevocably changing everything. The truth, when it finally erupted, was absolutely brutal. Before I recount the heart-stopping moment that upended my life and my family's, tell me, where are you tuning in from? Drop it in the comments below. And if you've ever felt compelled to conceal your accomplishments from those who doubted you, resonate with this? Hit that like button. Believe me, you are not alone. I am Samantha Hayes, 35 years old. For years, my family believed I was nothing more than a military washout, a perpetual underachiever. Yet on that pivotal day, I stood as a colonel in Air Force Special Operations, a ghost in the back row, witnessing my brother's moment. The searing irony, the profound pain of it all, was almost too much to bear. Growing up in San Diego, as the daughter of retired Navy Captain Thomas Hayes, military excellence wasn't merely encouraged. It was an enshrined expectation. Our home was a hallowed museum of naval memorabilia. Dinner wasn't just a meal, it was a strategy session, replete with Dad's booming tales of deployments. His eyes would gleam, a laser focus reserved solely for my younger brother, Jack, who, like a sponge, absorbed every word. I listened, equally fascinated, yet my enthusiasm never quite resonated with him in the same way. Samantha has a sharp mind. My father would confide in his Navy buddies, but she lacks the discipline for service. That assessment stung deeply. I dedicated my entire childhood to emulating his footsteps. I ran before school, devoured military history, and applied to the Naval Academy with impeccable grades and test scores. When I received my acceptance, it was the proudest day of my life. My father actually hugged me, a rare enough event to feel monumental. "Don't waste this opportunity," he grumbled, his voice gruff, though I desperately hoped it veiled emotion. The academy was everything I dreamed of, challenging, fulfilling. I excelled in strategy, in physical training, graduating at the very top. But what my family never knew was that during my third year, I was quietly approached. Intelligence officers. They'd seen something unique in me, an aptitude for discerning things others missed. They offered me a position in a classified program, one that demanded immediate transition and absolute secrecy. My cover story? The simplest, most believable one. I'd washed out. Many talented individuals didn't make the cut. It would draw minimal attention. I agreed, foolishly believing my family would eventually learn the truth. I couldn't have been more wrong. I just don't understand how you could throw it all away. My mother, Eleanor, lamented during my first visit home after my supposed dropout. Her disappointment was a palpable weight in the room. Tight lips, eyes that deliberately avoided mine. "Your father pulled strings to get you considered." I didn't ask him to. I replied quietly, the classified nature of my new life sealing my lips, locking away any meaningful explanation. My father was worse. He didn't rage. He didn't lecture. He simply stopped talking about me. When relatives inquired about his children, he'd light up, launching into Jack's accomplishments at the academy, where he was following the traditional path I'd supposedly abandoned. Then, he'd deftly change the subject when my name arose. Thanksgiving dinners became an exercise in endurance. "Jack's been selected for advanced tactical training," my father would announce, carving the turkey with almost ceremonial precision. "Top of his class. We're so proud." My mother would add, her hand resting on Jack's shoulder, her eyes gliding right past me. It's comforting when your children find their purpose. My cousin Melanie, always tactless, once leaned across the table. "So, Sam, are you still working that administrative job at the insurance company?" This was the cover story I'd meticulously crafted, a soul-crushing corporate drone designed to discourage further questions. "Yes, I answered, swallowing both the lie and my pride. Still there. Good benefits, I guess. Good benefits, she'd replied, that thin smile conveying volumes about her assessment of my life choices. Meanwhile, my actual career was advancing at an extraordinary pace. I couldn't breathe a word about the clandestine night operations in nations officially untouched by American forces. I dared not mention the vital intelligence I'd gathered, intelligence that had undoubtedly saved countless lives, nor the commendations accumulating not on my wall, but within the secure confines of a classified facility. I couldn't explain the months of impenetrable silence, periods when I was utterly unreachable, operating deep undercover. Each triumph in my secret world, each hard-won victory, felt like another unspoken disappointment in my family's eyes. When I was promoted to major, my parents were celebrating Jack being selected for an elite training program. When I received a silver star in a private ceremony, my mother was lamenting to her friends about her daughter, who just didn't apply herself. Jack wasn't unkind, but he followed our parents' lead, growing distant as our supposed life paths diverged. He'd call, sharing his accomplishments, always ending with an awkward, "So, how's the office job?" I'd murmur, "Congratulations," offering vague updates about my fictional corporate life, hating every second of the deception. Years passed. The divide widened. I developed a thick skin, focusing on my missions, the tangible difference I was making. But deep down, the pain of being the family disappointment never faded. Every achievement in my secret life was shadowed by the knowledge that the people who should be proudest didn't even know. My transition from Naval Academy student to Air Force Special Operations was abrupt and intense. While my family believed I was licking my wounds, settling for civilian mediocrity, I was actually undergoing some of the most rigorous training the military offered. The program that recruited me specialized in intelligence gathering and analysis with direct tactical applications, a rare combination that perfectly suited my particular skills. The training facility wasn't on any map. It was an unmarked compound in Virginia, where days began at 4 a.m. and often ended after midnight, pushing every human limit. Physical conditioning was just the foundation. The real work involved processing and analyzing intelligence in real-time crisis situations, often under extreme stress or sleep deprivation. "Ace, your mind works differently," my instructor, Major Lawrence, noted after I solved a particularly complex simulation. "You see patterns where others see chaos." This aptitude accelerated my progress. While most trainees took 18 months, I finished in 11. My first assignment came immediately, a low-profile intelligence gathering operation in Eastern Europe. Colonel Diana Patterson became my mentor, a pioneering woman in special ops. She saw herself in me. "The system isn't built for us," she told me. Frankly, but that's precisely why we succeed. We approach problems from angles others don't consider. Under her guidance, I learned to navigate not just operational challenges, but the unique difficulties of being a woman in this elite space. She taught me to use others' underestimation as an advantage, to speak with quiet authority, and to build networks of trust that transcended traditional hierarchies. By my 4th year, I'd been promoted twice, leading my own intelligence team across 3 continents. My specialty, extracting critical information in environments where traditional assets couldn't operate. One mission in Syria saw my intelligence prevent a major terrorist attack on European soil. The classified commendation cited my exceptional judgment under extreme pressure and innovative tactical approach. Yet each time I received recognition in my classified world, the contrast with my family life grew more painful. I attended awards ceremonies alone, watching other officers embrace their proud families. I celebrated promotions with colleagues who knew only pieces of my story, never the full picture. And I continued to maintain my cover as an unremarkable corporate drone during increasingly infrequent family visits. "Congratulations on your promotion to team lead in customer service," my mother said during one phone call, genuinely trying to show interest in what she believed was my career. I had just been promoted to lieutenant colonel after a successful counterterrorism operation in Somalia. "Thanks, Mom," I replied, hating the deception. It's just a small step up. The operational security requirements meant absolute secrecy. Even as I rose to command larger teams, more sensitive missions, my cover story remained. Only a handful of high-ranking officers knew my complete service record. Most who worked with me knew only what was relevant to our joint operations. By the time I reached Colonel at 34, an accomplishment that placed me among the youngest to achieve that rank, I had led operations in over a dozen countries, saved countless lives. My specialty in counterterrorism had expanded to include disrupting human trafficking networks and preventing hostile cyber operations. What made my rapid rise even more remarkable was achieving it while facing the additional challenges women in special operations encounter. I navigated skepticism, adapted to equipment designed for male physiology, and developed leadership styles that commanded respect in environments where female leaders were still rare. Through it all, I carried the strange burden of my family's disappointment. Each time I returned from a classified deployment to a holiday gathering, I stepped back into the role of Sam, the underachiever. I became adept at deflecting questions with vague corporate jargon, redirecting conversations to Jack's increasingly impressive naval career. The weight of these dual identities grew heavier with each passing year. There were moments when the deception felt unbearable, like when my father made a casual comment about people who couldn't cut it in real service, or when distant relatives asked patronizing questions about when I might find direction in my life. But my commitment to national security, to the missions I led, always silenced the impulse to reveal the truth. The work was too important, the stakes too high. If maintaining my family's disappointment was the price for operational security, I would continue to pay it, regardless of the personal cost. Last Thanksgiving was a particular low point. I had just returned from coordinating a joint intelligence operation with NATO forces. 36 sleepless hours of tension that prevented a significant security breach. Instead of recovery time, I went straight to my parents' house, exchanging tactical gear for civilian clothes, the hyper-vigilance of command for the different tension of a family dinner. My father stood at the head of the table, crystal glass raised. "To Jack," he announced, his voice carrying that captain's authority, whose selection for the elite SEAL training program continues our family's tradition of excellence in service. Everyone raised their glasses. My mother beamed, her eyes glistening. We couldn't be prouder. I joined the toast sincerely. Jack's accomplishment was significant. Despite our strained relationship, I respected his dedication. But as glasses clinked and congratulations flowed, my mother leaned toward her sister and whispered, just loudly enough for me to hear, "At least one of our children is making us proud." The comment sliced through me. Despite years of developing thick skin, I excused myself to the kitchen, ostensibly to help with dessert, but really to compose myself. My cousin Melanie followed, cornering me by the refrigerator. "Still pushing papers at that insurance company?" she asked, sipping her wine, an air of superiority about her. She'd just been promoted at her law firm. "Something like that," I replied, focusing on arranging pie slices rather than meeting her gaze. "You know, my firm has an opening in our administrative department," she offered with faux generosity. "Probably pays better than what you're making." I could put in a word. I thanked her politely, imagining her reaction if she knew I'd briefed the Joint Chiefs of Staff the previous week. The dinner conversation shifted to a recent military operation that had made national news, an operation I had actually helped coordinate from the intelligence side. I sat silently as my father and uncle analyzed what little public information had been released, both confidently incorrect about how the mission unfolded. If they'd approached from the eastern perimeter instead, my father declared with authority, they could have avoided that initial resistance. I took a long sip of water, knowing the eastern perimeter had been deliberately avoided due to intelligence I'd personally verified about hidden surveillance systems. The urge to correct him burned in my throat, but I swallowed it with my water. After dinner, Jack announced his engagement to Allison, a naval medical officer he'd met during training. The family erupted. Champagne appeared. Toasts multiplied. My mother immediately started discussing wedding plans. In the midst of this joyful chaos, my secure phone vibrated with a pattern that indicated highest priority. I slipped away to the guest bedroom. Immediate deployment orders. A situation had developed requiring my specific expertise. Extraction scheduled in 3 hours. I returned to the celebration, pulled Jack aside. I offered genuine congratulations, then explained that a work emergency required me to leave immediately. His face fell, disappointment tinged with that familiar judgment. Seriously, Sam, it's my engagement celebration. What kind of insurance emergency happens on Thanksgiving night? I'm sorry, I said, meaning it completely, but unable to explain further. I wouldn't leave if it wasn't absolutely necessary. My parents reacted with the resigned disappointment I'd grown accustomed to. Of course, Samantha has to leave, my mother said to the relatives, not bothering to lower her voice. Her priorities have always been different. I caught my father's head shake as I gathered my coat, the subtle gesture of disapproval that had followed me since childhood. As I drove away, my family continued celebrating without me. I, meanwhile, mentally prepared for the classified operation ahead. The mission kept me deployed through Christmas and into the new year. When I finally returned, I learned my absence had become a focal point of family discussion. Jack's engagement party had been held without me, interpreted as further evidence of my disregard for family. Your brother was hurt, my mother informed me during a tense phone call. After everything he's accomplished, the least you could do is show up for his important moments. What she couldn't know was that during his engagement party, I had been leading a critical intelligence operation that resulted in the rescue of kidnapped aid workers. The mission earned me another commendation, one that would remain in a classified file, not on my mantle. The growing divide between my professional success and personal failure created an increasingly unbearable tension. Each family interaction grew more strained, each deception more painful. As Jack's seal ceremony approached, I found myself at a breaking point, torn between my duty to national security and my crumbling relationship with my family. The day of Jack's seal ceremony dawned clear and bright, perfect Southern California weather that seemed to mock my inner turmoil. I deliberated for weeks about whether to attend. My presence would be scrutinized by a family increasingly frustrated with what they perceived as my indifference to Jack's achievements. My decision to go wasn't simple. I requested a rare day of leave, arranged secure transport, and carefully selected civilian clothes that would allow me to blend in, yet still maintain an appropriate military bearing, a habit too ingrained to break. Even now, the Naval Special Warfare Command facility gleamed in the morning sun. I instinctively cataloged security positions and protocols with my trained eyes, noticing details most civilians would miss. This ingrained awareness reminded me how far I was from the person my family believed me to be. I arrived deliberately late, slipping into the back row as families claimed seats near the front. My parents occupied prominent positions in the family section. My father, in his dress uniform, wore the pride of a naval captain whose son was following his distinguished path. My mother sat beside him, elegant in navy blue, her posture reflecting the military precision she'd absorbed through decades of marriage to my father. The ceremony proceeded with the characteristic discipline and tradition of naval special warfare. Every element, from the presentation of colors to the precise movements of the honor guard, followed protocols I knew intimately from my own classified ceremonies. The difference was today's event was public, celebrated openly with proud families, unlike the clandestine recognition of my own achievements. As the ceremony progressed, I found myself analyzing the security perimeter out of professional habit while simultaneously absorbing the significance of Jack's accomplishment. Becoming a SEAL represented years of grueling training and exceptional dedication, a fact I appreciated, perhaps more fully than anyone else in my family could. Midway through, I noticed a familiar face on the platform, Rear Admiral Wilson. He commanded joint operations where my intelligence team had provided critical support. He was scheduled to deliver remarks. Seeing him triggered an immediate internal alert. Admiral Wilson was one of the few high-ranking officers who knew my complete service record, my true rank. I shifted slightly in my seat, angling myself to become less visible from the stage. The movement was subtle, the kind of adjustment intelligence officers make instinctively to avoid recognition. For a moment, I believed I had successfully minimized my presence. Then came Jack's moment of recognition. He stood tall as his accomplishments were read, his face composed in the disciplined expression of a warrior receiving honors. Despite our complicated relationship, pride swelled in my chest. Whatever else had transpired between us, my brother had earned this moment through genuine merit and determination. As applause followed Jack's recognition, I allowed myself to relax marginally. A mistake in retrospect. My slight movement caught Admiral Wilson's eye during his scan of the audience. I watched his expression change. First confusion, then certainty, then an unmistakable reaction to finding a highly decorated Air Force Special Operations colonel sitting anonymously in civilian clothes at a Navy SEAL ceremony. Our eyes locked momentarily. In that brief exchange, I conveyed a silent request for discretion, a plea that military personnel of our rank and experience understand implicitly. The Admiral gave an almost imperceptible nod, and I believed the moment had passed without incident. The ceremony continued. I began calculating my exit strategy, planning to congratulate Jack briefly before departing to avoid extended family interaction. But as the formal portion concluded and families began moving toward their graduating SEALs, I noticed Admiral Wilson conversing with another officer, gesturing subtly in my direction. My internal alarm sharpened. The second officer, Commander Brooks, had also worked with my team during a joint counterterrorism operation the previous year. Now, both men were looking in my direction with that particular expression of military leadership, preparing to acknowledge a fellow officer. I began moving toward the exit, hoping to evade the approaching confrontation, but the crowd's movement blocked my path. As families surged forward to congratulate their graduates, I found myself inadvertently pushed toward the area where Jack stood with my parents, rather than toward the exit I'd been targeting. In that moment of navigational confusion, Admiral Wilson reached me, his commanding presence parting the crowd around us. I straightened instinctively, muscle memory responding to the presence of a superior officer despite my civilian clothes. What happened next would permanently alter my family's perception and change the course of our relationships forever. Colonel Hayes. Admiral Wilson's voice carried clearly above the post-ceremony chatter. It echoed in the space around us, turning heads. My parents, standing just feet away beside Jack, froze in confusion. "I didn't expect to see you here today, Admiral Wilson," I responded automatically, assuming the formal posture ingrained through years of military service. "It's good to see you, sir. Last time was that joint operation in the Gulf, wasn't it?" He continued, either unaware of or unconcerned about my family's proximity. "Your intelligence was impeccable as always. Save a lot of lives." My mother's hand flew to her mouth. Jack's expression transformed from celebration to bewilderment. My father stood rigid, his brow furrowed in deepening confusion. "Colonel," my father finally spoke, the words sounding foreign on his tongue when directed at me. "There must be some mistake." Admiral Wilson turned, noticing my family for the first time. Recognition flashed across his face as he took in my father's decorated Navy uniform. "Captain Hayes," he acknowledged with respect before turning back to me with raised eyebrows. "They don't know." Before I could respond, Commander Brooks approached, extending his hand. "Colonel Hayes, your team's work on the Antalya operation was remarkable. We've implemented your extraction protocols across 3 divisions now." The reality of my position was materializing around us like a photograph developing in solution, becoming clearer with each passing second. My carefully maintained cover, the story of professional mediocrity I'd cultivated for years, was dissolving in real time. "Samantha?" My mother's voice trembled with confusion. "What are they talking about?" Admiral Wilson assessed the situation with the quick comprehension of a seasoned commander. "Captain Hayes, Mrs. Hayes," he addressed my parents directly. "Your daughter is one of our most valuable assets in special operations. Her work in intelligence and counterterrorism has been extraordinary." "That's not possible," my father stated flatly. "Samantha left the Naval Academy. She works in insurance. Air Force, not Navy," Admiral Wilson corrected, "and at a rank that reflects exceptional service. The insurance work would be her cover story, fairly standard in her division." Jack stepped forward, his new seal trident gleaming on his uniform. "Sam, is this true?" The moment of decision had arrived without warning or preparation. Years of secrecy pressed against the sudden exposure, creating a disorienting pressure. But as I looked at my family's confused faces, I recognized that continuing the deception was no longer an option. "Yes," I confirmed simply. "It's true." My father's expression cycled through disbelief, confusion, and the beginning glimmers of reassessment. "You're actually a colonel in the Air Force. Special Operations Command Intelligence Division." I specified, the words feeling strange after years of careful avoidance. "I was recruited from the academy directly into a classified program. The Dropout story was my cover. Other officers who recognized me had begun to drift over, creating an impromptu gathering that made the revelation increasingly public. A major from Joint Special Operations nodded respectfully in my direction. "Colonel Hayes's analysis changed our entire approach in the Mogadishu intervention." My mother looked physically unsteady. "All this time when we thought." "I couldn't tell you," I said quietly. "Most of my work is classified at the highest levels." The cover story was a requirement, not a choice. Jack's expression had transformed completely, shifting from confusion to a growing understanding that only another military professional could fully grasp. "That's why you missed my engagement party." Coordinating an extraction of exposed assets in Eastern Europe, I confirmed. "Couldn't wait, and I couldn't explain." My father, ever the Navy man, had regained his composure, processing the information with military precision. "What's your security clearance level?" "Higher than I can specify in this setting," I answered, the response itself confirming more than the words contained. Around us, the crowd continued to celebrate, largely oblivious to the family drama unfolding in our small circle. But within that circle, years of misperception were crumbling under the weight of revealed truth. Admiral Wilson, sensing the personal nature of the moment, prepared to withdraw. "Captain Hayes, you should be proud. Your daughter's service record is exceptional. The details are classified, but the value is beyond question." He turned to me with a respectful nod. "Colonel, I'll see you at next month's Joint Operations briefing." As he departed, the protective barrier between my two worlds, the accomplished military officer and the family disappointment, had been irrevocably breached. Standing before my family in civilian clothes, but now recognized as Colonel Hayes, I felt exposed in a way that countless high-risk operations had never made me feel. "Why would you let us believe you'd failed?" my mother asked, hurt evident in her voice. "It wasn't about what you believed," I explained carefully. "It was about operational security. The fewer people who knew, the safer the operations and the people involved." My father, processing this revelation with decades of military experience, was beginning to understand the magnitude of what had been hidden. To reach colonel at your age in special operations, Jack, with his own military training, was connecting dots fastest. Those unexplained absences, the vague explanations. That time you showed up at Christmas with what looked like shrapnel wounds you claimed were from a car accident. "Not a car accident," I confirmed quietly. As reality settled around us, I watched my family recalibrating years of perceptions and judgments. The disappointment they had carried, and the disappointment I had endured, was transforming into something else entirely. Something yet undefined, but irrevocably changed. "We have a lot to talk about," my father said finally, his voice carrying the weight of a man discovering he had been profoundly wrong about a fundamental truth. "Yes," I agreed. "We do." The family dinner following Jack's ceremony took place at an upscale restaurant near the base, a celebration planned long before the day's revelations. What should have been exclusively focused on Jack's achievement had now become something else entirely. The first honest family gathering of my adult life. We sat at a private table in the corner, security conscious even now. My father ordered wine with uncharacteristic generosity, perhaps recognizing that this conversation required social lubrication. Silence hung heavily as menus were studied with unusual intensity, everyone avoiding the elephant in the room until the waiter departed with our orders. So, my father began, setting his water glass down with precision. A colonel. It wasn't a question, but I nodded. Confirmation. That's remarkably fast advancement, he continued, the career military officer in him automatically calculating the timeline, especially for someone in... He lowered his voice. Special operations. It was a unique path, I acknowledged. The program I was recruited into accelerates promotion timelines based on field performance rather than standard timing or grade requirements. My mother, who had been unusually quiet, finally spoke. All those times we thought you were being flaky or irresponsible, disappearing from family events, being unreachable for days. I was deployed. I finished for her. Often in locations I can't name, doing things I still can't discuss. Jack leaned forward, professional curiosity mixing with brotherly reassessment. That scar on your shoulder from 2 Christmases ago. Kabul, I said simply. Extraction operation went sideways. My father's face tightened. The career naval officer understood immediately what went sideways typically meant. And we were giving you grief about missing family photos, my mother whispered, horror dawning in her expression. The conversation paused as our salad arrived. When the waiter departed again, my father asked the question that clearly bothered him most. Why the Air Force? You were at the Naval Academy. I had to smile slightly. Of course, that would be his first substantive question. The program that recruited me operated jointly, but was administratively housed under Air Force Special Operations. The work suited my particular skills, regardless of branch. Which are, he pressed. Intelligence analysis under high-pressure conditions, pattern recognition in asymmetric environments, asset development and management. Some other specialties I can't detail. Jack whistled softly. That's the heavy stuff. My mother was struggling to reconcile the daughter she thought she knew with this new reality. But why couldn't you tell us anything? We're your family. Operational security, I explained gently. The nature of my work means that knowledge of my real position could potentially endanger operations or expose networks. The cover story was created and maintained by the program, not by my choice. For 12 years, my father challenged, the hurt beneath his question evident despite his military bearing. Not one word truth. That's the job, Dad. I said simply. You, of all people, should understand that some positions require complete compartmentalization. He fell silent, military discipline acknowledging what the father in him wanted to deny. The main course arrived, providing another brief reprieve. As we began eating, Jack broke the tension with a short laugh. So all those times I was bragging about my promotions and assignments, you were talking to someone who was briefing Joint Chiefs? I finished with a small smile. God, I must have sounded like such an idiot, he groaned. You didn't, I assured him. Your accomplishments are real and significant. Different operational areas, different challenges. My mother set down her fork, her food barely touched. I keep thinking about all the things we said to you over the years, the disappointment we expressed, the judgments. You didn't know, I said. You couldn't have. But we should have trusted you, she insisted, tears gathering. We should have seen that there was more happening than what appeared on the surface. Instead, we just wrote you off. The raw truth of her statement hung in the air. They had written me off, creating a narrative of the disappointing daughter that fit the limited information they had. My father, always less comfortable with emotional displays, redirected slightly. Your upcoming promotion. Admiral Wilson mentioned a briefing next month. Are you being considered for Brigadier General? I confirmed quietly. It's not finalized yet. His eyebrows rose sharply. At your age, that would be unusual. I acknowledged. The recommendation is based on the Tavos operation results. That's all I can say about it. My mother wiped her eyes. And we wouldn't have known about this either if today hadn't happened. I hesitated, then admitted the truth. Probably not the details. You might have eventually learned I was military, but specifics about rank and position would have remained classified. The meal continued with questions I could answer, intermingled with ones I couldn't. The boundaries of classified information remained, even in this new openness, creating an imperfect but vastly improved communication. For the first time, my family was seeing the outline of my real life, even if many details remained in shadow. After dinner, my parents invited me back to their home, a gesture that felt significant after years of emotional distance. In their living room, my mother disappeared briefly, returning with a dusty box. "I kept these," she said, setting it between us, "even though I didn't understand why you'd want them." Inside were mementos from my academy days, my midshipman's cap, academic awards, photographs, items that would have made no sense to preserve for someone who had supposedly failed out. Yet, she had kept them anyway. "Some part of me never believed the story," she admitted quietly. "It didn't fit the daughter I raised, but I couldn't imagine an alternative explanation." My father, after several drinks and hours of processing, had grown unusually reflective. "I was hardest on you," he acknowledged, military directness applied, now to a personal failing. "When we thought you'd washed out, I took it personally. Made about my legacy rather than your path." I understood why. I told him honestly, and maintaining the cover story was part of my duty, even when it was difficult. The concept resonated deeply with his naval corps, at the expense of being known by your own family. Jack, who had been listening quietly, finally spoke again. "But things could be different now, right? I mean, we know the basic truth, even if details stay classified." It was the question I'd been considering throughout the evening. "Some things can change," I agreed cautiously. "You'll know my actual profession now, my general position, but most of my work will remain classified. There will still be unexplained absences, questions I can't answer, but we'll understand what they mean now." "Now," my mother said, as the evening drew to a close, my father did something unprecedented in our relationship. He stood, straightened as if addressing a fellow officer, and extended his hand formally. "Colonel Hayes," he said, using my rank for the first time, "I believe I owe you an apology and my respect." I took his hand, years of military bearing preventing the emotion in my throat from showing on my face. "Thank you, Captain." It was an imperfect beginning to a new chapter, one where the truth, even partially revealed, created possibility for healing what deception had damaged. As I left my parents' home that night, I carried both the continued weight of necessary secrets and a newfound lightness of being partially known by those who mattered most. 6 months after Jack Seal's ceremony, I found myself approaching my parents' home for another family gathering. This time, a 4th of July barbecue, a Hayes family tradition for decades. The familiar nervousness that had accompanied these visits for years had transformed into something different, a cautious optimism about family relationships rebuilding on more honest ground. As I walked up the driveway, carrying a dish I'd actually prepared myself rather than the usual hastily purchased store contribution, I noticed several of my father's old Navy colleagues gathered around the grill. In previous years, I had avoided these military-heavy gatherings whenever possible, finding the deception particularly difficult among those who spoke my professional language. Today was different. My father spotted me and straightened slightly. Not quite the attention stance of military protocol, but a new recognition that carried its own significance. "Sam's here," he called, using my familiar name, but with a new tone. As I approached, he did something unprecedented. He turned to his friends and said, "Gentlemen, my daughter, Colonel Hayes, Air Force Special Operations." The introduction, simple but accurate, represented a seismic shift. The retired officers nodded with the respect of men who understood precisely what the rank and division signified, particularly for someone my age. No details were necessary. The basic facts communicated volumes to those who spoke the language of military service. My mother emerged from the house, her greeting warmer than I could remember in years. As she hugged me, she whispered, "I put together a small display. Nothing classified, I promise." Curious, I followed her inside to the study, my father's domain, traditionally filled with his naval memorabilia. In one corner, she had created a discreet but meaningful arrangement. My academy graduation photo, the few unclassified commendations I'd been able to share, and a recent formal photograph in uniform following my promotion to Brigadier General. "Is this okay?" she asked, uncertainty in her voice. "I wanted to honor your service, too, but I wasn't sure about security concerns." I examined the display carefully. "It's perfect," I assured her. "Nothing here reveals operational details." Her relief was evident. "Good. Your father checks it every day, you know. I think he's still wrapping his mind around everything." Returning to the backyard, I found Jack manning the grill alongside our father. My brother's transformation had been perhaps the most straightforward. One military professional recognizing another with a shared understanding that comes from parallel experiences, despite different branches and specializations. While telling me my degree from MIT and 3 years of coding experience wasn't enough to warrant even an entry-level management position, Dad's face flushed at the reminder. That was different. "Garrett is my son, my firstborn. And there it is," I said softly. "The real reason I was never given chance. Not my ideas, not my education, not my work ethic, just my gender." The painful truth silenced the room again. Even Garrett had the grace to look uncomfortable. "This conversation is over," Dad finally declared. "Everyone out. I need to call my attorneys." He stormed from the dining room, the sound of his study doors slamming echoing through the house moments later. Mom rose unsteadily to her feet. "I should go check on him," she murmured, though she paused beside my chair. "Are you really worth $200 million? I nodded. "And all those times you couldn't come home for Christmas because you said you couldn't afford the plane ticket. I was running a company, Mom, and I needed you all to keep underestimating me." She touched my shoulder briefly, an unreadable expression on her face, then followed after Dad. As the dining room emptied, I remained seated, looking at the abandoned Thanksgiving feast around me. The turkey had grown cold, the candles burned low, and the family I had once desperately wanted to impress had scattered in shock and anger. It should have felt like victory. Instead, a hollow ache spread through my chest as I realized that while I had finally earned their attention, I was further than ever from earning their understanding. I retreated to my childhood bedroom as the house descended into chaos below. Through the floor, I could hear Dad shouting on the phone, presumably to his lawyers, while Mom's placating tones rose and fell in counterpoint. Occasionally, Garrett's angry voice would join the cacophony, followed by Megan's dramatic wailing. My old room remained frozen in time, a museum to the person I had been. The twin bed with its navy blue comforter, the desk where I'd spent countless hours coding and dreaming, the bookshelves lined with computer science textbooks, and the few fantasy novels I'd allowed myself as rare indulgences. Debate trophies and academic medals gathered dust on the shelves, achievements that had never impressed the one person whose approval I had sought most. I ran my fingers along the spines of my old journals, pulling one out at random. Inside were detailed business plans, algorithm sketches, and notes for the very cloud integration platform that had eventually become Everest's flagship product. The irony was not lost on me that everything I had built had begun right here, in a room where I had felt most invisible. A sharp knock on the door interrupted my thoughts. I opened it to find Garrett, his tie loosened and face flushed with either anger or alcohol, possibly both. "We need to talk," he said, pushing past me into the room without waiting for an invitation. I closed the door and leaned against it, arms crossed. "About what, Garrett? How I ruined your Thanksgiving. Or how you plan to inherit a company you helped run into the ground. You think you're so clever, don't you?" he hissed, pacing the small space like a caged animal. Little Morgan with her computers and her secret identity. "Did you enjoy lying to our faces all these years?" "About as much as you enjoyed taking credit for my ideas," I replied evenly. "Remember when I suggested Adam's software should move to cloud-based solutions 6 years ago during Christmas dinner? Dad dismissed it as trendy tech jargon. But somehow, 3 months later, you presented the exact same concept as your own strategic vision." Garrett stopped pacing, his expression darkening. "I was the one who stayed. I was the one who put in the time at the company while you ran off to California to prove some point." "You put in time?" "Yes. But what did you actually contribute, Garrett?" Besides expenses on the company credit card for client dinners at strip clubs and a corner office you used primarily for naps between hangovers. His face contorted with fury. You don't know what you're talking about. I brought in the Westfield account. Westfield came to Atom Software because I personally reached out to their CTO as Emmy Stone and recommended your services as part of my long-term acquisition strategy, I informed him. And I know exactly what I'm talking about because I've been auditing the company remotely for the past year as part of my due diligence, including the financial records you thought were only accessible on the local server. The color drained from his face. What are you saying? I know about the $300,000 you embezzled through fake vendor accounts. Garrett, I know about the phantom consulting fees that went directly to your personal offshore account. I know everything. He took a threatening step toward me. You can't prove any of that. I have transaction records, account numbers, and IP logs showing the falsified entries came from your office computer on days when only you were present in the building. I held his gaze steadily. I'm not planning to pursue criminal charges, Garrett. That would hurt the company during the transition. But don't test me. You, he whispered, hands clenching into fists at his sides. You would destroy your own brother. I would hold accountable a thief who happens to be related to me. I corrected him. There's a difference. We stood in tense silence until he finally turned away. This isn't over, he warned, yanking open the door. Actually, it is, I said to his retreating back. You just don't realize it yet. I had barely closed the door when another knock came. This time it was Megan, her makeup freshly touched up despite the tear tracks still visible on her cheeks. So, you were like a secret millionaire, she said without preamble, entering my room and immediately sitting on my bed. That's actually kind of badass. I couldn't help but laugh at her rapid pivot. Is that what you were going with? 5 minutes ago, you were crying about losing your heir status. She shrugged, examining her manicure. I'm adaptable. It's essential for influencer longevity. She looked up with sudden calculation in her eyes. Just think of the content we could create together. My sister, the tech mogul. My followers would eat that up. Is that why you're here, Megan? To propose a business collaboration? More like a mutual arrangement, she said, smoothing her dress. You need a media presence for your company that humanizes you. And I need an authentic connection to actual business success instead of just looking pretty with products. The nakedly transactional nature of her proposal was so typically Megan that I almost admired it. And what about actually working for the company? Learning the business? Contributing something beyond your Instagram aesthetic? She wrinkled her nose. God, no. Coding is boring, and business meetings make me want to die. But I could be like the brand ambassador, the face of the company for the lifestyle market, the face of an enterprise software integration platform for the lifestyle market. I repeated slowly. Do you hear yourself? Megan stood, straightening her shoulders. Fine. Mock me like everyone else in this family. But my social media skills are actually valuable in today's market, whether you respect them or not. I built my own brand from nothing, just like you did. The parallel had never occurred to me before, and I found myself momentarily speechless. There was a strange kind of truth to it. General, he greeted me with a grin and a deliberately informal salute. Burger or hot dog? Both, I replied, falling easily into the sibling banter that had been absent for too long. I just finished 3 weeks of MREs. I'm making up for lost time. He nodded, understanding immediately what 3 weeks likely signified without asking questions he knew I couldn't answer. This new shorthand between us, acknowledging the boundaries of classified work without resentment, had become one of the unexpected gifts of the truth. The afternoon progressed with a lightness I hadn't experienced at family gatherings in over a decade. Though many topics remained off limits, my recent deployment locations, the nature of current operations, the specifics of upcoming assignments, the fundamental truth of who I was and what I did now formed the foundation of our interactions. My father, always more comfortable with actions than words, found ways to express his changed perspective. He introduced me to his colleagues with unmistakable pride. He referenced my operational insight when discussions turned to current military affairs. And most tellingly, he deferred to my expertise in areas where Air Force operations intersected with naval concerns. a professional respect that meant more than any verbal apology. As evening approached and we gathered for the traditional Hayes family photo, I stood beside Jack. Both of us now recognized for our service, rather than compared by it. My mother arranged us with the precision of a long-time military spouse. "My children," she said to a neighbor who was taking the photograph, both serving their country, just in different ways. The simple statement acknowledged the parallel value of our different paths, a recognition that would have seemed impossible a year earlier. Later, as fireworks illuminated the sky, my father joined me at the edge of the yard, where I'd stepped away briefly to check a secure message. "All good?" he asked, the question encompassing more than the immediate communication. "Yes," I confirmed, returning the phone to my pocket. "Nothing urgent?" He nodded, gazing upward at the patriotic display rather than at me. A military man's approach to emotional conversation. "I've been thinking about what it cost you," he said finally, carrying that cover story all these years, bearing our disappointment when you were actually doing my job. I finished when he trailed off. "That's all it was, Dad. The job I was assigned, with the parameters required." "But the personal cost," he insisted, still watching the fireworks, "missing the recognition you deserved, even from your family." I considered this, formulating my response with the same care I applied to operational assessments. There's something freeing about being evaluated solely on your work, without external expectations or family legacy influencing perceptions, I offered. In some ways, starting with a blank slate let me define my own path. He absorbed this perspective thoughtfully. "Still, I regret the judgments we made with incomplete information." "That's the nature of intelligence work," I replied with a small smile. "Everyone operates with incomplete information. The difference is whether you recognize its incompleteness." This observation, applying professional principles to personal relationships, seemed to resonate with him. "A fair assessment," he acknowledged, military precision in his nod. As we rejoined the family gathering, I reflected on the strange journey of the past 6 months. The revelation at Jack's ceremony had not instantly repaired years of misunderstanding, but had created space for something new to grow. The family that had once seen me as their greatest disappointment was now navigating a recalibrated relationship based on partial truth, the maximum disclosure my position allowed. 2 weeks later, I stood at attention during my promotion ceremony, the stars of a brigadier general being affixed to my uniform. Unlike previous promotions celebrated only among cleared colleagues, this one included 3 seats in the family section, occupied by my parents and brother. The technical details of my accomplishments remained classified, in the official citation cloaked in the deliberately vague language of special operations, but the pride in my family's eyes needed no detailed explanation. They understood enough now. Not everything, but enough. As the ceremony concluded and I joined my family, my mother embraced me with tears in her eyes. "I always knew you were exceptional," she whispered. "I just didn't know how." My father, ever the naval captain, extended his hand for a formal shake before professional composure gave way to parental pride. He pulled me into a brief, tight hug. "Well done, General Hayes," he said gruffly. "Well done." The journey from family disappointment to recognized professional had been complicated by necessary secrets and security requirements that would never fully disappear. But standing with my family, accepting congratulations for an achievement they could finally acknowledge, I found peace in being partially known, in imperfect but meaningful visibility after years in the shadows. For anyone who has been misjudged or underestimated, there's a powerful lesson in this experience. Sometimes the truth emerges in unexpected ways, and sometimes the perceptions others hold aren't reflections of reality, but simply products of limited information. The worth you create through your work and choices remains valid, even when unrecognized. And authenticity, even when necessarily incomplete, creates possibilities for connection that deception cannot. So what about you? Have you ever been misjudged based on appearances or assumptions, or kept parts of yourself hidden for necessary reasons? What was that like? I'd love to hear your stories in the comments below. If this journey of family reconciliation and professional recognition resonated with you, please hit that like button and subscribe to hear more stories of resilience and unexpected revelation. Thank you for listening to my story. And remember, sometimes the most powerful truths are the ones we carry quietly within us until the right moment for revelation arrives.